Hi, my name is Rich Davis, and I am the writer and creator of Cult of Dracula from SourcePoint Press. So, Cult of Dracula began as a stage production in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was produced at the Brown Coat Pub and Theater. We had the very good fortune to have Tony Todd. Folks might recognize him as the Candyman. He was in the audience for one of the performances and enjoyed it very much. And Tony and I, after that, became very good friends. Tony has been very supportive of the project and encouraging the entire way. And he convinced me to adapt Cult of Dracula into a screenplay. I actually created the character of Agent Brom with the idea that Tony would play him in that film adaptation. Spent about close to 2 years doing that. Unfortunately, in that time, my wife became very ill. She ultimately passed away this past December. But we had to make a huge move in our life, and we moved from Wilmington to Knoxville, Tennessee. I said, this is silly. We can't focus on this. We don't have the time or the resources. We have to focus on your health. She lit into me like she's never lit into me before. And luckily, she had a copy of the PDF that I had sent to her. And so she kind of pulled it out of the trash bin and told me, like, look, you could do something else with it. And we started kind of brainstorming, what could we do? And she said, well, why don't you do a comic book? I reached out to a friend of mine named Georges Genti. Comic book fans might recognize him. He was an artist for Buffy the Vampire Slayer for many years. Also did Firefly and Serenity, and he did Batman. He did some X-Men work. And Georges was he was very, very helpful in my adaptation. He hooked me up with his friend Henry Martinez. Georges and Henry grew up together and both worked for Marvel. Henry did Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze, Spirits of Vengeance, things like that. And, Georges was like, I think you guys would get along. And I think Henry's style would complement your writing quite well. So got involved with Henry. It was amazing to work with him. Henry and I clicked, very early on. And we produced the first issue through Second Sight. And it was a massive success. SourcePoint is ultimately where we ended up, and I couldn't be happier. I think we definitely made the right choice there. Cult of Dracula was written specifically for horror fans. So I have been a fan of horror my entire life. I love to be scared. To me, there's no better feeling than that exhilarating adrenaline rush I get when I'm afraid. I think horror fans are some of the best fans in the entire world. When horror fans love something, they love it all the way. There's no half doing it. There's no in between. They're all in. So with Cult of Dracula, we don't pull any punches. We definitely are upfront about the horror. It's in your face right in the very first issue. We're killing babies. We've got vampires and blood and gore and supernatural. It's a pretty awesome ride, but I definitely wanted it to be something that appealed to hardcore fans of horror, but also that wouldn't be intimidating for casual fans. I think Cult of Dracula does have enough in it that if you're not, just a horror addict, you're still going to enjoy it because there's a pretty compelling story in there. And there's a ton of horror movie Easter eggs hidden throughout the comic. So that's also very fun. I moved away and lived on the beach in Wilmington, North Carolina for, almost 15 years. And in Wilmington's a little more of a cosmopolitan area where, people go to church, but then they come home. And once you come home, church is over. You take your church hat off and you do your thing. But where I grew up in Appalachia, it was more church was your life. Like people went to church 4 or 5 times a week and they went to revivals, and where you went to church determined your status in the community and who you were. And that's kind of a theme in Cult of Dracula as well, how pervasive religion and the church is. It's a cult book. It's as much a cult book as it is a vampire story. So, in those same themes that you'll find in Appalachian history and Appalachian culture, they kind of play very well with Southern Gothic literature, which was, of course, inspired by Gothic literature. I was a huge fan of Gothic literature that I could not get enough. Things like obviously Dracula, Frankenstein, the Picture of Dorian Gray, but also things like Northanger Abbey and The Monk, and poems by Pierce Bysshe Shelley and things like that. They inspired me because I love them. The characters that you meet in Cult of Dracula are all from Bram Stoker's original novel. But what I tried to do was give them a little bit of a unique modern spin. I didn't want to go back to Victorian England. I didn't want to tell that story because that story's been told so many times. I don't know how you could possibly tell it again and tell it differently. You'll see all the seeds of Stoker's original novel, but you're going to see it from a different perspective and a different angle, rather than fear of a foreigner. Because Victorian England, one of the common things at that time, people were afraid that foreigners were invading Britain and stealing their culture, so that really isn't much of a fear today. Although it is kind of rising again, you'll see, with fear of immigration and things, but it's still not as pervasive as it was in the Victorian era. The Britons in that time period were genuinely afraid that their culture was going to die. Dracula became a vampire who was sucking the culture out of them and leaving something completely different and monstrous in its place. Our Dracula is a woman. So it's written, I'm obviously a white male. So for me, the other is a woman. And so we play with that fear quite a bit. There's this character that appears in just about every religion, every mythology, every scary story from every culture, no matter where they're from or what era they existed in. This character is always there. And it's a woman who has been outcast, shunned by society, forced to live in the shadows. And she haunts the darkness and steals naughty children from their parents to survive by devouring their blood. And so I started thinking to myself, what if that figure or those figures, what if that they were one person, one figure, but the people observing them interpreted them in different ways? I started to roll with this idea that Dracula was the Wendigo. Dracula was La Llorona. Dracula was Lady Bathory and Barbaroga and Medusa and Lamia and Lamashtu and all of these women, Tituba from the Salem witch trials, all of these figures from world history were Dracula. The linchpin came when I started reading the Midrashic story of Lilith. Everyone knows the basic Lilith myth that Lilith was Adam's first wife. They were created from the same earth, and Lilith left Adam because she refused to be subservient to him. But when you read the Midrashic version of the tale, it goes deeper into it, and God basically in this story feels bad. He admits that he made a mistake in trying to make Lilith less than Adam. So he orders 3 angels to go and find Lilith, and she's living in a cave at the edge of the Dead Sea. And he says, "Go to Lilith and tell her I'm sorry. All is forgiven. If you want to come back to Eden, you're welcome." God says, though, if she doesn't want to go back, that's fine. Let her be. So Israfil was the lead of the three angels, and he hated humans. Angels in the old Judaic texts were not like angels that we think of today. They hated humans. They were jealous of humans, and so when they go to visit Lilith and to make her God's offer, Lilith basically says, I'm good. I'm happy. I'm living my life. I'm free. And I'm going to stay here. So Israfil blows up into a rage and curses Lilith. And he says, basically, you're arrogant, and, God has made you this offer and you're rejecting it. So you're cursed. You're going to be, you can live your life free the way that you want. You don't have to come back to Eden, but you're going to have to survive by devouring 100 of your children every single day. And once I read that story, I was able to connect all of those other myths, because now Lilith, in a lot of mythologies, Lilith is the mother of demons. So in our world, Lilith is the mother of vampires. I have been so fortunate to work with some of the most amazing artists in the world. Henry Martinez began, we did issues 1 and 2 together for Cult of Dracula. Unfortunately, 2020 happened and COVID happened. Henry and his family were severely impacted by COVID-19 last year. We ultimately decided it was better to make an artist change and let Henry focus on his health and his family's health and recovering, rather than delay the book or try to force him to keep up with a schedule that was harming him. So we parted company with Henry and we picked up Puis Calzada. And Puis, I had seen his art in books like Hatchet and Era of Great Wonders and some other things. Puis had a really cool horror style. I was very much inspired by grindhouse films from the 60s and 70s, and then later on films from Dario Argento, Tobe Hooper, and they had this kind of gritty vibe to them. And Puis's art has that same inspiration, that same feel. As far as cover artists go, Gyula Nemeth, he's based in Budapest, Hungary. And I met him by accident. I saw a piece of art that he posted on Facebook, of all things. And I was just like, wow. And so he and I started talking, and we both found out that we have a deep love of horror. And not only do we have a deep love of horror, but we have a deep love of Hammer films. So we were thinking, I was like, I'd really like to do for Cult of Dracula #1, I'd really like to do something that's kind of an homage to Hammer. And he's like, I think I've got this perfect idea. And he took a picture of his office where he's writing, and on the wall right behind his desk is this gorgeous poster from I believe it was from a Horror of Dracula, and it's boom right there. And I was like, oh God, that's perfect. And so he and I started talking about, okay, how do we change the composition? Rather than using Dracula, we chose to use the brides. And the way he positioned them, it looks like it could have been hanging in any grindhouse theater in 1962. I also have been very fortunate to work with Shannon Mayer. Shannon's style is completely, actually, you can see Shannon's cover of #1 hanging on the wall behind me right now. And Shannon's style is completely different, but it is, the same level of amazing. Shannon is one of the kindest and most welcoming people I've ever met. And he talked to me early on about the project and what I wanted to do. And I could tell from the beginning he was deeply engaged with it, and he wanted to help me and he wanted to be a part of it. My fanboy mind right there, just boom, just like if I would have died in that moment, I would have died a very happy person, because this artist that I admire and respect wants to work on my book. There's only 2 issues on the shelves and one more coming very, very soon. And already the brides have become, fantastically popular characters. We're probably going to go to some conventions this year and see people cosplaying the brides. I have worked in theater, I've worked in film, I've worked in radio, I've worked for a newspaper, I have worked for 2 presidential and 1 senatorial campaign. I've done a lot of things, and my life has been a lot of things, but it's never been boring. I have to say, I am enjoying being a comic book creator more than anything that I've ever done. I love being able to do this, and just to being able to express myself creatively this way and to tell stories that people are actually enjoying. It's amazing to me. You were a top 100 book, possibly a top 50 book, which is incredible from a mid-sized publisher like SourcePoint Press, from a writer that no one's ever heard of. So that and the great news is sales keep increasing. Issue 3 sold more than issue 2. Issue 4 sold it more than issue 3. Issue 5 looks like it's going to sell more than issue 4. So that tells me that the people they're picking the book up at their local comic book shops. They're reading it and they're enjoying it, and they're telling their shop, "Hey, please add this to my subscription list." So volume 2 is going to be called Rise of Dracula. It's going to come out in December of this year of 2021. And it grows into a John Carpenter style world. All of a sudden it's, we're no longer confined to Southern Appalachia in this one little church. We're experiencing the world of vampires and Dracula rising to power, if you will. And so it's very John Carpenter. The world is just screwed. And then by the time we get to Reign of Dracula, which is volume 3, it's full on George Miller, Mad Max. As long as people, still want to read what I write, I'm glad to keep writing it. And if they stop reading it, I'm probably still going to write it. It's just probably not going to get published anymore. So, we'll see where it goes. I'm gonna do this for as long as they'll allow me to do it.